So, Mr. Tritt, we know you've got a lot of stories to tell because you've been around for a few years. What does your shirt say? How many years? 96?
96 and a half.
96 and a half. Okay. So if you want to tell us your story, we need to start at the beginning. Can you tell us where you were born and when, and a little bit about your family when you were born?
Okay. I was born in the state of Pennsylvania, in the town called Centerville. Centerville is a little town on what's called Walnut Bottom Road. The farm that I was born in was very young in my life. I lived on this farm for 4.5 years. After several sicknesses of my mother, Clair Tritt, she developed pneumonia, and we had much sickness in this farm, and there was too much work to do for one man and my father, which was a farm right close to the town of Centerville, Pennsylvania. The reason that this story is going to be a little confusing is my father decided that the sickness was just too much, that he moved to Carlisle at 275 South Pitt Street. There he obtained employment as a tinsmith for Mr. Moore's, a roofer, and he worked with them and learned a trade of cotton metal roof on high buildings. I am the oldest child of 3. I had one brother later on in the years, and I had one sister and 2 brothers. My brother Wayne was my next youngest in age. We were 2 years and 2 days apart in birthdays. After moving to Carlisle, I became cityfied. I was no longer a country boy, and as a result of this, I became very active in city activities. I lived close to my first year school, which was the Franklin School building on West Street, and I went through 5.5 years there in Franklin School building. It was at West and Walnut Street. I had a nervous breakdown in my 1 year, and I had to take it over a second time. I'm not sure what age it was, but I think it was my 3rd year in the elementary school. And I'm not very smart about the dumbness that I had, so they suggested I could take that year of school over again. After leaving the elementary school of Franklin, I went to the elementary and all the high school at the rear of Graham Street. And that's where I graduated in 1939. After I graduated from there, I became very much interested in the fire department, which was approximately 2 blocks away from where my home was at 275 South Pitt.
Mr. Tritt, before we talk about the fire department, I think you told me a while back there was something unusual about your graduating class in high school?
I was one of the first employees, not employees, I was one of the first not patient either, I was one of the people that went through an industrial arts course, which was the first year for this type of schooling. I learned a lot from Mr. Ostad, my educator, my instructor, and I learned a lot about live electricity and a lot about other types of professions in the city.
Do you remember about how many people were in your graduating class?
My graduating class was, I'm not very accurate on this, but the picture that I have of this is about 12 or 14 people, the first class in this type of education. It was more or less like hand-to-hand educating by an instructor, and I learned an awful lot in later life that I used from this class.
What did Carlisle look like? Do you remember anything about what Carlisle looked like at that point when you were a teenager? Like, what did you do for fun, and what did, what was in town? What are some of the buildings you remember in town?
When I came to Carlisle, I was finished my first year of school in Centerville, but I finished that year in the Franklin School, and I was very much surprised to see the improvements in the building of the school, and I was very happy to be a bigger class than what was in Centerville, Pennsylvania.
And so what did you do for fun as a teenager?
The most thing important to me was the house that we lived in was 275 South Pitt, but I joined a club of boys in the area, which was 8 boys. This is called the Lazy 8 Club. Our purpose of the Lazy 8 Club was to rent a small room on Walnut Street, and we played music, and we got a record player of music for the children. The purpose was that the kids didn't have any entertainment, so we played music and held dances. The money that we made on this was saved, and in the Christmas season we would take 50 people, children of the elementary grades, and we gave them a Christmas dinner at one of the popular restaurants. None of the money that was gathered either by membership or by playing music, we had a very small fee for the children to come and dance in this dance hall. I was vice president of this organization, and there was 8 of us, and we called ourselves the Lazy 8 Club. We would take turns in monitoring the dances to make sure that there was nobody getting too smart, this is only held on Friday nights after the football games or basketball games, and they would come there, and we would have a soda machine that they could use to have a little refreshments. That was very important in my life, and I was vice president, and it was important that we kept a very straight activities, no fighting, no swearing, no cussing. It was more of a little bit of a religious organization, but we had a lot of fun with dances.
Do you remember them? I'm sorry.
I had one lady, that was a girl, became engaged to one of the boys, and they later married as a result of being members of the Lazy Eight Club.
Oh, that's wonderful. So, once you were out of high school, what happened next?
The next thing that became very active in my life was that I worked for Mr. Earl Franklin, who had a miniature golf course at the end of College Street and Walnut Bottom Road. It's now a activities on that highway, but I was a clerk. They had soft drinks, and they called chocolate milk. And I had curb service, and I would have work there after school and work till midnight. The rules in the Pennsylvania labor said you could not work past midnight, so at midnight I would have to quit. And they served beer, but I could not serve it because I was less than 21.
So tell me what happened then. Did you go to college right after high school, or
After I got out of school, and before I got to school at the age of 18, I was helping my father in a grocery store at the corner of Pitt Street and Walden Street. And the grocery store there.
That's a laundromat now? Is that correct?
Beg pardon?
Is that a laundromat now?
It's
Okay.
now a laundromat.
Okay.
My grandfather owned the building, and my father and my mother started a grocery store. The next thing that came about was I would work in this grocery store, filling the shelves and making sure that the potato bags that were bought in 100-pound bags were divided into small 10-pound bags so that the customers could carry the potatoes home and fill the shelving with where they were empty, and to fill the shelf, keep the shelves full all the time. And one of my main customers my father had was a man by the name of Fred Brown. He had a barber shop in the old Sentinel building behind the old courthouse. And when there was a fire, Mr. Brown would leave the barber shop, whether it was haircut completely done, or whether it was just something that he was sitting there waiting for customers to come. And when the alarm would go in at the firehouse, which was only half a block away from his barber shop, he would go there, and the fire apparatus that we had required two drivers. One driver in the front and one driver in the back. Mr. Brown would always be the man required to steer the Empire Hook and Ladder Fire Company, the truck, to the fire. And the truck driver, his name was Mr. Myers. Mr. Myers was the front driver, and Fred Brown was the back driver. and they would take this aerial truck to the fire. And this man lived just several houses away from my dad's grocery store. And when he came into the grocery store and would buy necessary things for living at a house close by.
So is he the man who got you interested in volunteering? Is he the one who got you interested in volunteering for the Empire Fire Company?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Brown was a very conscientious man, and he would make his haircutting business a part of the fire company. And he gave me an application and said, I'd like for you to join. So at 18, I became a member in 1940.
38? If I'm doing the math right, it would have been 38.
38.
Right.
1938, I was still in high school, a junior in high school, and I was a volunteer. And for a little background, the volunteers of the Carlisle Fire Department are not paid. They must purchase their own clothing, fire protective clothing, their helmets, their clothing, their shoes and boots, and the truck would wait a few moments after the alarm come in so that they would have time to get to either they go to the fire, which is coded by a number of bells ringing, and that would tell the firemen where the fire was at. If they missed the fire truck because they couldn't wait any longer, they would drive to the fire scene and get their gear on, keep their gear not on the fire truck, but most of the men bought their own gear and carried them in their personal cars and put their stuff, protective gear on after arriving at the fire. So it was very important that we know how and where the fire was.
When you started volunteering, what kind of equipment did you have, and how many people do you think were volunteering at that time?
The Empire Hook and Ladder truck is not what we call a apparatus. The fire trucks their department is consisted of 5 fire companies. Each company had their own particular group of firemen, and when they arrived at the scene, they would put on their helmets. They would put on their protective gear, which is fireproof coats and fireproof pants and boots. And for the ones that could afford it, would get dressed before they did into the fire scene. The only paid firemen in the Carlisle Fire Department are just the man who drives the apparatus, and anybody that rides on it must have their protective gear.
So the building that you worked out of is the building on Pomfret Street, where it's now the Carlisle Arts Learning Center.
Yes.
Tell me what that building looked like when you were a volunteer there, and what kinds of things you did when you were not putting out fires.
After being in the fire department and received training at a training center, we were allowed to ride the fire equipment. Before that, they were given training classes at the firehouse. We'd show them how to put ladders up. And the Empire was a ladder company which was used to carry extended long ladders up into the air or up to buildings that were more than 2 stories high. The most important thing was I eventually became so interested in that I became what they called a reserve fire apparatus driver. And I only did this on weekends. The driver is the only paid fireman in the department, and the chief is also paid. The rest of them must buy their own fire gear, and any equipment they wanted, they had to buy it, and it was theirs to keep. We had training usually once a month or more often, particularly on weekends, holidays, or weekends and holidays. We'd take the truck out and practice putting the ladders up and letting them down.
Do you remember the names of any other people who were volunteers when you were a volunteer?
Yes, we had a very good group of young men that were like me. They became very interested in riding the truck, so they would do their training in order to make sure that they were qualified to go on the fire apparatus. The fire department consists of 5 fire companies, and the 4 companies are what we call pumpers. They go to the scene of the closest fire hydrant, and they'd hook up their pumpers to the hydrants, and then they lay the hose to the fire, and after the hose was all laid and the water was ready to go, they would man the hose.
Do you remember any of their names?
Most of the people that were there was Mr. I was trying to think of.
Yeah, it's hard to remember names, isn't it? Yeah, it is hard. But anyway, now what did you do when you were at the fire company, but there were no fires? What did you do to pass the time?
What we usually did was show movies of trainings, and we had a pool table on the first floor, and we would entertain ourselves with playing pool, or sometimes we'd show movies,
And you had bunks there, and you could cook meals there too, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
I became what they call a reserve driver for weekends. The driver was usually given one day of the week to do what he wanted to do. And he got a vacation, and we had a place on the second floor of the Empire where we slept. We had a bunk room, but the Empire was more or less a backup truck where we would carry a lot of the material that would not be on a pumper. A pumper was used to pump water from the hydrant through the fire engine and through the hose and out the end of the hose. Do
you remember any big fires where a number of buildings were destroyed? Do you remember?
Before I forget it, Mr. Kelly was our chief for many years, and he obtained many awards because he had to go to school, and he had to learn a lot on his own, and he regulated a lot of buildings that didn't have sprinkler systems.
So how many years altogether were you a volunteer at Empire?
I was a volunteer from the age of 18. which was 1938.
Mm-hmm.
I lived just 2 blocks away from the fire truck apparatus where it was stored. And our only income was from the Borough of Carlisle, which awarded us an appropriation each year, and that we used to maintain the truck. The trucks were bought and stored and operated by a group of firemen trained to do that. And the driver, he had to be made sure that he could qualify to drive the apparatus.
So were you there, a member, for more than 50 years? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
I remember I'm up, I think, 61 years of
So you're
membership.
You're still a member. Mm-hmm.
But being a reserve driver, I worked from 6 o'clock on Saturdays and sleep there Saturday night in the bunk room and play pool or write letters or do things that I couldn't do at home. And I slept there just on Saturday nights. Mr. Merv Brock was a very active man, and his brother Richard Brock was an auxiliary reserve, and him and I would alternate working a weekend. In other words, I'd work 2 Sundays, Saturday night and all day Sunday, so the paid fireman could have 1 day off.
Well, obviously, the fire company was a big part of your life, but it was a volunteer job. What was your paying job? What were you doing when you weren't at the fire company?
When I was at the fire company, I graduated from high school in 1939, and a lot of times I got into the business of selling the helmets, badges, and clothing that the men needed. And I got in to be a distributor for a company that sold that kind of stuff. And I would, any of the firemen wanted to buy their own personal fire equipment, I was the one they came to. I would measure them up for clothing and their fitting, and firemen didn't know where to go to buy it, so they bought it through me. So I was in the fire extinguisher sales and service.
Now, when did your military service begin?
The draft was very important in my life. I was very much interested in going to be in the service, and I didn't want to be told where I had to go, but I decided that I wanted to be a Navy or sailor. So in 1941, I joined the U.S. Navy in Harrisburg, and was not accepted the first time because I weighed 4 pounds less than standards. The standards are if you weigh so much, you must have a certain weight determined by your age, and the qualifications for my first rejection to the Navy was I was 4 pounds light in my weight according to the standards. So they told me to go home and do a lot of eating of rich foods and gain 4 pounds and then come back. 1 month I transpired. I went back. I didn't go through the routine again because it had been through that once before, and I was rejected. And I went back after a month, and I didn't gain any weight. So we tried. He told me to go back the second time, or go home and attempt to gain weight. And that didn't work after one more month. So as a result, the third time I went, the medical officer says, I give up, you're in the Navy, that's 4 pounds.
Well, that worked out well. So what did you do on your, what tours were you on in the Navy? What did you do when you were in the Navy?
When I was in the Navy, I was in boot camp at Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and became a boot man. And during my training there, I was asked what did I want to specialize in the Navy, and I said I want to be an electrician. Well, an electrician was very busy, but I ended up being the best of the electricians, and those people are selected to specialize in what we call fire control man. The man that does the firing of the guns has to be calibrated every so often. What fire control is not firing of the boilers or have anything to do with the heating or anything like that. It's calibrating the guns to the guy that does the firing. We have 5 people on board a ship. I was eventually assigned to a ship right after the war, and I was sent from the San Diego School of Electricians, and the best of those men were picked and used and selected for the fire control man. The fire control man is the man responsible for aiming the guns from the computer that they had on board so that it would compute how far the gun should shoot the shell out to the enemy.
So when you left San Diego, where did you go?
Pardon?
When you left San Diego, where did you go?
When I left San Diego, with the Japs, the rumor was that they were going to come to San Francisco and go on through and capture everything and end up in New York. Well, we stopped them in Pearl Harbor. They didn't make any more movement than there. They weren't smart enough, and they were eventually outnumbered, and they decided that it wasn't worth what they had to do.
So you were at Pearl Harbor. You were at Pearl Harbor.
I was at Pearl Harbor
on D-Day.
The first 2 months I was there, I was pumping oil out of the ship where it had sunk in shallow water, and we were pumping oil out of that and repairing the holes and made the ship floatable again and serviceable again. And eventually the captain of one ship says that we need some fire controlmen, and I was one of the ones selected to go on board the ship. And
do you remember the name of the ship?
Beg pardon?
What was the name of the
The
ship?
name of the ship that I was assigned aboard was the USS Salt Lake City. The ship in the navies are named after large cities. The battleships, which is the largest of guns, which was 16-inch, and the next largest is big cities, and the Salt Lake City happened to be one that I got on board. And the guns must be aimed at whatever the computer says. We have 5 men on the ship that are working with binoculars, what they can see closer than 2 miles. And record, they have earphones, and they record the number, the distance that the shell must reach before it gets there. Because what you do, you must calibrate from the computer the travel of the ships. In fighting on sea, you must have a lot of things to calibrate so that when the shell is shot from USS Salt Lake City and it goes out to the enemy, the things that shell has to go through. It has the wind, the guns, wear and tear, and the battles in Navy is they go side by side. So you're going to use half of your guns at any time. They turn and come back and they fight each other back and forth.
So you
so
were...
The guns have to be calibrated every so often for wind
So you were pumping oil out of this ship, and then the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. What did you do? What were you doing on that day? What do you remember about that day?
When I went on board after the Pearl Harbor attack, I was sent to Pearl Harbor. We didn't have any place to sleep, so we slept in the bunker, in the auditorium, not auditorium, but the field where they played football and basketball. They had a big stadium, and we slept on the seats. So they got the building back in operation that we could sleep on our hammocks.
And did you have a certain job you had to do while they were trying to repair all of the damage? What did you have to do?
I was being trained for the particular ship that I was on. Every ship has a little bit of difference with their own peculiarities. Salt Lake City only had 8-inch shells, and we are calibrating and making sure that the accuracy of the shell is going to hit the target when it goes out.
So when did you
train and train all the time?
When did you leave the Navy?
I left the Navy 4 years, 8 days, or 1 month and 8 days in the service.
Okay. And then what did you do?
Then I came home from the Navy. I was, when I enlisted with what they called 6E, meaning that when the war was over, I'd be one of the first ones discharged to go home. I was only volunteered for the duration of the war. And as soon as the war was declared over, I was one of the first to come home.
And you went home to Carlisle?
I went home to Carlisle. My father and mother were still running the grocery store.
Okay. So Mary is your second wife?
I married my second wife.
Mary?
Yes.
Yeah. Her name is Mary?
Yes.
And you were married how many years?
I've been married 51 years.
Oh. 61?
51. 61.
61. That's a lot of years.
That's a lot of years.
And you and Mary lived in Carlisle all those years on Walnut Street?
Yes.
Okay. And you said you were working at the Navy Depot. And how long did you work at the Navy Depot?
I worked there 28 years.
Okay.
And I did a lot of work that I did in the Navy aboard ship.
So tell me about your other children. You have other children. Tell me about them.
Yes, I got married to Mary, and we had one boy and 3 girls.
And what are their names?
Their names is Clair Tritt, And the second one was a daughter, which was Molly Mackey. She got married, but Mackey, I'm sorry, I'm mixed up here. Molly was the second child, and she was a girl. And then my second girl was Robin, and the third girl was Kay. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
My mind is.
And they all live in this area. They all live.
They all live within
yeah.
10 miles of Carlisle.
That's unusual these days.
That's
Yeah.
unusual.
And you have a number of grandchildren.
I have.
Yeah. And great grandchildren.
9 grandchildren.
9. 9 grandchildren.
And one great grandchild. Is that?
We had 1, 2,
Oh.
3. 3 and 1 on the way.
Okay. 3 great grandchildren and 1 on the way. Oh, how wonderful. So you were at the Navy Depot for all those years, and then you retired from there.
Yes.
And what did you do next?
I went into the business of being a fire extinguisher sales and service, being in the fire department connection. I still continue to sell firemen's clothing and equipment and stuff that they needed to be able to join the fire companies.
And you did that from your home?
I did that from my home. Yes.
What was the name of the company?
It's called Fire Extinguisher Sales and Service. And I sold fire extinguishers and firemen's clothing, badges, anything that the fire department needed. They didn't know have any place to go buy it. I would be the one that they come to, and I would make contact with the manufacturers and sell it through me to the people who want to buy it.
And I understand you also people and how to use the equipment.
Yes, being in the fire extinguisher business, it was in my blood. And while I was selling fire extinguishers for 30-some years, I got in the business of training people in schools, churches, manufacturing plants, hospitals, and showing the people that worked in these facilities how to use these equipment. And I enjoyed that so much.
Do you remember some of the places you went to do the training?
Most of the places was the hospitals. I do once a year. I take the nurses and take them out and actually set a fire and let them use a fire extinguisher to put the fires out. So they would get the feel and get the fright of using it away from them. And I enjoyed that so very much, and I feel that they don't do enough of this training in the activities where like manufacturing plants, hospitals, the nurses don't have a chance to use the fire extinguisher, and they'd be scared to use them. So I took that fright away from them and made them feel at ease.
Did you have any employees working with you?
Yes, I had 5 employees working with me. I had several men that went out in a truck. I had 3 trucks, and I would let them do the work, and I would do the training.
Do you remember any of your employees' names? Any of the
Employees' names?
Yes.
Yes, I had my son Ike. He was one of my employees. He enjoyed working on Saturdays and in the evenings, and he enjoyed that. And then I had my one daughter, Kay. She married a fellow. His name was Darryl Miller. And they finally got married, and he worked for me for a good many years. That was Darrell Miller, and then there was a couple part-timers that I had that worked on weekends. They were interested in selling clothing, that kind of stuff. So.
And then you sold your business, is that right? You sold the Extinguisher business?
The reason I sold my business was my wife was an office worker, and she did all the office and paperwork. And she got to the point where she did everything by pen and pencil. And it got to too much, she couldn't keep up, so I said, okay, I'm going to send you to school to learn to use
Computers? Or a computer?
computer. I said, you learn to use a computer. She said, no way am I going to school. So I had to sell the business, and I sold it to a company in Harrisburg. The other person that was involved was a bulldozer boy, and his father was an employee of the Carlisle Barracks Fire Department. And when he retired from there, he came and worked for me for a good many years.
And what is the name of the company that bought your business? The people who
bought the business.
Yeah, what's their
business that they bought me out was Kent Corporation.
Kit Corporation?
K-I-N-T Corporation.
Kent. Okay.
They bought my business.
So after you sold your fire extinguisher business, I know you still had a lot of energy, so what did you do next?
After I sold the business, I went into a sharpening business. I didn't have I sold the fire extinguishers, and I went into the sharpening business, which is sharpening kitchen knives and
Lawnmower blades, I think, and scissors.
Sharpen scissors and anything that had a blade. And I'm still involved with that, but I'm at the age now that I'm very positive that in the very near future I'm going to have to give it up and either sell it or make arrangements for somebody else to do the work for me.
And where did you do your sharpening business? Where did you do your sharpening work?
My sharpening business, I had a building on my property of 14 car garages, and I rented them out to neighbors and people that want to use I have one business that rents 3 garages, and I rent the other garages for car storage. And I had a personal shop in my coach's shop, coach's building, and that's where I did my scissors and knife sharpening.
Well, I know you sharpened scissors and knives for me, and you did an excellent job, and that's how we met, actually.
Yeah, very right.
Yeah, so that's been a while since you've been doing that. Yeah. I still would like to hear more about what Carlisle was like many years ago. Can you think of anything that you would want people to know? You know, how is it different now than what you remember from many years ago?
Carlisle is a very honorable name. It was named after an Indian, I'm told, and that I'm very proud to live there. I lived in the same house until I got married, and then I married and moved 3 doors away in a house that my wife and I bought, and that's where I raised my 5 children.
Do you remember anything about what the streets looked like or what people did for entertainment all those years ago?
When I was in the fire extinguisher business, I visited almost every building in Carlisle. The factories, the manufacturing plants like Maslin's, shoe business, they were required to have their fire equipment inspected once a year. And I got into that business, and my boys, or my helpers, would do a lot of that on weekends, like part-timers. And
How is driving out the Walnut Bottom Road different than it is now? When you drive out the Walnut Bottom Road, it's all built up. How was it different back a number of years ago?
the Walnut Bottom Road, the building that's there now, is only about 20 years old, and I was going through high school. Mr. Earl Franklin had a miniature golf course, a gas station, and they called them the barbecue sandwiches, and it was curb service. And I would go there after school and work till midnight. And some nights I would get it, a slow night, I would probably get home earlier. But I was very energetic, and I sort of failed in school because I did very little studying at the weekend. And so Water Bottom, the miniature golf course sort of faded away. Most of those customers were law students or college students. And my employer, Mr. Fricklin, got me a bicycle. And he put a little trailer on the back, and he had a cardboard box with a strap on it. And we put a lot of candy in this box and take orders for sandwiches. And I'd go into the fraternity houses and take orders. They liked the chocolate milkshakes, and they liked the beef barbecues. And I would take those orders back and sell them to the people. And that's where I got my sales experience.
Which ended up being very helpful for all of your future careers, right? And so then I'm thinking, if you're 96 years old, then you have a couple things I want to hear about before we finish. And the first thing is, can you look back on your life and tell me what is the one most joyful time, or a couple of the most joyful times of your life? What comes to mind? That's a whole lot of years to look back on.
My most experience was in the fire department.
You just got a lot of joy out of working in that.
I devoted most of my life with that.
Mm-hmm.
I am also very proud of being a sailor. Mm-hmm. I went to the service. I was very honored to be chosen to go on board a ship. I did my duty, I served my time, and I came home and got into the civilian backgrounds.
Okay. Well, one more question. Again, since you're 96 years old, what advice do you have for people? How do you live to be the ripe old age of 96?
A little understandable, but there's one word that's in my new vocabulary, and that is unstoppable. Unstoppable means that when you finish one chore, you jump to another chore and keep going. Don't lay down behind a TV. Don't lay down. Go, go, go.